What happens when the nation's top law enforcer is accused of breaking the very laws she's sworn to uphold? That's exactly what viewers witnessed in a hearing that's now exploding across social media. A tense, fiery exchange that left the Attorney General visibly shaken as Representative Rosa DeLauro demanded answers about billions of dollars that seemed to have vanished from crucial public safety programs. This wasn't politics as usual. This was a warning shot about what happens when justice itself gets rewritten behind closed doors. And the moment it started, you could feel the air in the room shift. Everyone knew something big was about to break, that DeLauro didn't ease into it. She went straight for the jugular, calling out what she described as an unlawful freeze on more than $4.5 billion in Department of Justice grants.
We want to protect the perpetrators. Why? Because the man in the Oval Office, Mr. Trump, told us he wants us to protect those files, does not want them public. On July 17th, the Wall Street Journal reported on a letter allegedly written by Trump to Epstein as part of a birthday book for his 50th birthday in 2003. The letter is signed at the bottom, Donald. It features a drawing of a woman's body with very suggestive text. I debated putting that letter up. There's a chart of it in the door behind me, but it's already been made public. The public has seen it. I find it profoundly offensive letter. And as I passed by a stack of newspapers today, I saw a series of examples of Donald Trump's signature, because Trump has said to the world, it's not my signature. But of course, the experts say that's not true. The birthday book contains another photo of Mr. Epstein holding an oversized novelty check from DJ Trump for $22,500. What is that check for? Underneath the photo, taken in the 1990s, a handwritten note says, quote, Jeffrey showing early talents with money and women. Cells fully depreciated, and then there's a name of a woman who's been blocked out, to Donald Trump for $22,500. I don't know if a woman was sold to Donald Trump for $22,500. I don't know what it means to call a woman fully depreciated. I don't know if it was just kind of a brazen joke between a couple of very powerful men, but it's certainly not a funny joke. It certainly implies and suggests a camaraderie in the idea that young women are for sale. On July 15th, House Speaker Mike Johnson told CNN, we should put everything out there and let the people decide it. Well, actions are more powerful than words. The words were, we should put everything out there. The action was he adjourned the House of Representatives early for August recess to avoid voting on release of the files. Well, the House is back in session now. So I call on Speaker Mike Johnson to stand up for the principle carved above those pillars on the Supreme Court, equal justice under law. Hold a vote in the House of Representatives on release of the files. The leader of the Senate told Fox News, I always am a believer in transparency. I think more is always better. Today we voted on transparency, and the vote from across the aisle was case closed, no transparency, no accountability. I certainly agree with the sentiment. It's time to put everything out there. The American people have been clear. They want these files released because they still treasure the idea that possibly powerful people in this chamber actually believe in the principles that we were raised on here in the United States of America of equal justice under law, that nobody is above the law. Still cherish that little seed of hope that maybe when we have a vote in this chamber, 100 senators will say, hell yes. But today, they were crushed because the majority said, hell no. Seal the file, protect the president, protect the powerful. To hell with justice for the victims, the young women who were so impacted, devastated by the activities of Jeffrey Epstein and his associates. The American people know better. They demand transparency. They demand accountability. They demand justice. The victims demand transparency. The victims demand accountability. And the victims demand justice. And we had a chance to deliver it today, and we failed them. My bill, which was introduced as the amendment by Senator Schumer, requires the Attorney General to release all materials and records related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, including the flight and travel records, the names of individuals, the names of businesses and nonprofits and other organizations, any immunity deals, any non-prosecution agreements, any plea bargains, any settlements, internal Department of Justice communications about decisions to charge or not charge those involved, all communications about attempts to conceal information or documents, and any documentation related to Mr. Epstein's detention or death. It makes one exception, and that exception is deleting the names of the victims involved. They should only be named if they choose to come forward. Let me quote from what this bill requires. No record should be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of any of the following: embarrassment, reputational harm, political sensitivity, including any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. But it will redact names of the victims and underage witnesses, including their personally identifiable information, depictions of their abuse, or information that jeopardize an active federal investigation or national security. This was carefully crafted with the insights of law enforcement to hold people accountable and redact only what was necessary to protect either an ongoing investigation or to protect the victims.
That money was meant for police departments, violence prevention programs, services for victims, and small-town safety initiatives. Instead, it had been stopped cold. There is no lawful authority to steal these funds, she declared, her voice cutting through the noise. You can say there is inherent authority over and over again, but it's not true. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The hearing room fell silent. Then, slowly, murmurs spread as people realized she wasn't exaggerating. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were lifelines for communities that depended on those grants to survive. Imagine the ripple effect. Police forces waiting on funding to replace broken patrol cars. Women's shelters losing staff because their federal support never arrived. Programs that keep at-risk youth off the streets suddenly shuttered. Deloro's outrage wasn't performative. It came from the real-world consequences unfolding across the country. She accused the Department of Justice of turning its back on the very citizens it was meant to protect. And in her words, what was once the guardian of the law had now become a tool of political retaliation, rewarding allies and punishing those who refused to play along. That's where things got personal. The Attorney General sat tight-lipped as Deloro pressed harder, repeating again and again, "You must unfreeze this money, or you're in violation of the law." The repetition wasn't for effect. It was a demand for accountability. Then Deloro went even deeper. She accused the department of being used not as an instrument of justice, but as an instrument of vengeance. She painted a chilling picture. Public servants inside the DOJ being punished, demoted, or dismissed simply for doing their jobs instead of following a political agenda. Loyalty or disloyalty toward a leader's ambitions, she said, is not a valid measure of performance, nor is it a basis for deciding who faces investigation. It was a direct confrontation, one that cut through any attempt to spin or deflect. The Attorney General, sitting under bright lights, tried to maintain composure, but the tension was undeniable. You could see the controlled breathing, the subtle glances to aides, the uncomfortable pauses between answers. And in those pauses, you could almost hear the unspoken truth echoing louder than any statement. But the hearing wasn't just about frozen money. It was about a pattern that DeLauro said showed deliberate sabotage of the very institutions designed to protect the American people. Billions frozen here, budgets slashed there, all under the guise of efficiency. She argued it was more than mismanagement. It was an orchestrated dismantling of the Justice Department's independence. Her words carried weight. The DOJ is not a personal law firm. It exists to uphold the rule of law, not the rule of one. The phrase hit like a punchline, except there was nothing funny about it. For years, the department had been seen as the last line between power and abuse. But if even that line was being erased, what was left? Then came the bombshell, the new proposed budget. On paper, it looked like a cost-cutting plan. In reality, DeLauro said, it gutted the very core of law enforcement. Cuts to the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Programs designed to fight gun trafficking, organized crime, and drug networks were being starved of resources. It wasn't trimming the fat. It was defunding the backbone of public safety. DeLauro's tone sharpened. You're defunding law enforcement, she said, disbelief in her voice. It was the kind of line that breaks through political spin and hits straight at the heart of the issue. The message was clear. When law enforcement is weakened, crime flourishes, and the people who pay the price aren't politicians. They're the families on the ground, the officers on the beat, the victims waiting for justice. What made her argument even more devastating was the detail. She cited specific programs: the Office of Violence Against Women, reentry initiatives for former inmates, and anti-hate crime efforts. Each of these, she said, was being bled dry. The budget even slashed the department's Civil Rights Division and National Security offices, the exact units that protect citizens from discrimination, extremism, and corruption. It was as if the safeguards had been systematically dismantled from the inside out. Analysts later described the cuts as a blueprint for chaos, warning that they'd make it harder to track criminal syndicates, prosecute fraud, or even respond to domestic terror threats. And perhaps the most telling detail of all, the department's Office of the Inspector General, its internal watchdog, was facing a staggering 30% reduction. That revelation changed the entire tone of the hearing. Cutting the Inspector General's budget wasn't just bad policy. It looked like a deliberate attempt to silence oversight. These offices exist to prevent abuse, investigate corruption, and protect taxpayer money. Without them, the system loses its self-check. A government without accountability becomes a playground for exploitation. DeLauro called it out directly. Do you want to eliminate waste and fraud? Or do you want to eliminate the people who expose it? She asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge no one dared to answer. Observers in the room described the Attorney General's expression as stone still. But silence, in that moment, spoke volumes. Outside the hearing, whispers began circulating about internal DOJ tension. Staff reportedly frustrated with orders to delay or deny grant approvals, citing unclear directives from above. While none of this was confirmed on the record, it fueled an even deeper concern. Was the Justice Department being steered by politics instead of principle? Rumors suggested some officials were instructed to review grant distributions to ensure alignment with preferred states or political allies. If true, it meant communities in need were being punished simply for geography or ideology. DeLauro's words had suddenly become more than rhetoric. They felt like a warning about the erosion of fairness itself. The emotional heart of the hearing came when DeLauro shifted focus from policy to people. She spoke of families in small towns relying on federal grants to keep their neighborhoods safe, shelters that depend on that funding to protect survivors, and officers working double shifts because their departments can't afford replacements. Every cut, every delay, every frozen fund wasn't just a number. It was a life disrupted. You could feel the weight of it. It wasn't just about missing money. It was about stolen security. When funds meant to fight violence and protect victims vanish into bureaucratic limbo, the fallout is immediate and devastating. Deloro's frustration reflected the outrage of countless Americans who'd seen promises of law and order replaced with confusion and cuts. But beyond the emotion, there was strategy. Deloro knew that hearings like this weren't just about confrontation. They were about creating a record, forcing transparency, and compelling answers that would otherwise stay buried. She reminded everyone watching that Congress holds oversight power for a reason, to make sure those entrusted with justice remain accountable to the people, not political convenience. If you believe in the rule of law, she said, then you must also believe no one stands above it. The words carried across the chamber, a quiet echo that seemed to outlast the noise. Accountability wasn't just a theme. It was the demand of the day. As the hearing dragged on, the Attorney General offered carefully worded replies, citing review processes, budgetary constraints, and ongoing evaluations. But each phrase only deepened suspicion. It was the kind of bureaucratic language that says everything and nothing at once. Deloro interrupted more than once, unwilling to let evasion slide. "You're freezing funds Congress already approved," she repeated. "That's not a review. That's breaking the law." At that point, even some members who had been silent began murmuring agreement. The tension had transformed into consensus. Something wasn't adding up. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and across social media, clips of the exchange began circulating with captions like, "This is how accountability looks." The reality is, being named in the Epstein files doesn't automatically mean guilt. That's the distinction most people miss. Being named isn't proof of a crime, it's a lead. It's a thread investigators can pull to see where the truth leads. Transparency doesn't assume guilt, it allows scrutiny. It's what gives journalists, prosecutors, and citizens the ability to test claims, expose cover-ups, and, if necessary, reopen cases. Secrecy, on the other hand, freezes everything in place. It turns suspicion into myth and leaves survivors stranded in limbo. Every time a lawmaker votes to hide these files, they're not just protecting privacy, they're protecting power. And the longer that secrecy stands, the more it corrodes trust in the institutions meant to serve justice. That trust is already hanging by a thread. For many Americans, the Epstein case became the symbol of what's broken. A man who operated in plain sight, connected to the elite, shielded by influence, and ultimately escaping full accountability. The files could have been a chance to repair that faith, to show that no one, no matter how wealthy or well-connected, is above the law. Instead, the Senate's decision confirmed the opposite. When citizens see that even a case this high-profile can be buried, they stop believing in the idea that justice is blind. They start believing that justice is for sale. And once that belief is gone, democracy itself begins to crack. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. Senators can block a bill, but they can't block public outrage. Advocacy groups, journalists, and everyday citizens are now demanding that this vote be revisited. They're calling, writing, and organizing, not out of political loyalty, but out of moral necessity. Because this isn't about one man or one administration. It's about the system itself. The same system that once let Epstein build an empire of exploitation while pretending not to see. If there's ever been a moment for Americans to unite across political lines, it's this one. Because justice for survivors should never be partisan. Every major movement for accountability in history began with public pressure. That's how civil rights were won. That's how whistleblowers forced reforms. And it's how the truth about Epstein's network can finally come to light. If senators won't act, the people can. It starts with something as simple as a phone call or an email. Tell your representatives you oppose secrecy that shields abusers. Demand a release of the Epstein records, with redactions only for victim privacy and active investigations. Ask them why a bill designed to protect survivors was voted down in the name of political convenience. Ask them if they still believe in equal justice under law, or if that phrase is just decoration on a marble wall. Because at its core, this isn't about scandal. It's about the soul of accountability. The choice is between light and shadow, transparency and cover-up, truth and silence. One path exposes corruption and begins healing. The other lets the cycle of abuse continue in the dark. And history will remember which side each senator chose. For the survivors still waiting for closure, this vote wasn't procedural, it was personal. Every no vote told them their suffering wasn't worth political discomfort. Every delay reminded them that power protects itself first. But it also reminded millions watching that justice can't exist without pressure, without people demanding better. What happened in that chamber will go down as one of the defining moments of this decade, a chance to prove that no one is untouchable, squandered by those who feared the truth. But it's not over. The push for transparency is growing louder by the day. Journalists are tracing financial records. Advocacy groups are filing petitions. Citizens are flooding offices with calls. The cover-up can only last as long as public apathy allows it. And that's the message that needs to echo beyond this video. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice pursued relentlessly can still be WON.SO. If you're watching this, don't let this story fade. Share it. Talk about it. Ask questions. Because sunlight is the only disinfectant strong enough to expose what's been hidden for far too long. And if you believe in the simple promise carved into the stone above the Supreme Court, that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, is above the law, then stand with those demanding the release of the Epstein files. The victims deserve more than sympathy. They deserve action. The truth deserves daylight. And the people deserve answers. That if you found this breakdown helpful, hit the like button. It helps more people see what the media often buries. Subscribe to stay updated as we follow every new development, and drop a comment with what you think Congress should do next. Because the fight for transparency doesn't end here. It starts with awareness, and it grows with you.